Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, its sequel, Banneker Bones and the Alligator People, and the third and possibly final book in the series, Banneker Bones and the Cyborg Conspiracy, drops soon and very soon. Coronavirus has thrown off launch date previously, so I'm done saying what date will be, but keep your eye on Middle Grade Ninja. It will be available very soon, middlegradeninja.com. In the meantime, get your copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees for free as an ebook. It's available as a paperback and audiobook, but the ebook is free. Free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So get that. Come back, see me with money for the other two books. We're going to be talking a lot about young adult horror tonight, and I have some of that under the super secret pen name Robert Kent. I've written all together now a zombie story, which is about teenagers and the zombie apocalypse. You're going to have a good time. And then I've also got a serial horror novel, The Book of David, which is a 5-volume serial horror novel. The first chapter of which is also available to download for free as an ebook whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. Atheist buys a haunted house that then begins to give him religious visions involving flying saucers. It is nuts. If you want to roll hard with Robert Kent, not Rob Kent, check out The Book of David, Chapter 1. As always, keep your eye on middlegradeninja.com. Hundreds of interviews with literary agents, authors, publishing professionals, folks you'd be interested in. And that's it. That's plenty. My God, we've got 2 guests tonight. We don't have time for all this intro. Let's get to it. My guests this evening are Saundra Mitchell and Josh Berk, or Josh Berk and Saundra Mitchell. So my first question is, it's on the book we're going to discuss tonight, Camp Murderface. It says Josh Berk and Saundra Mitchell. So is that the official order, or how did that get decided and worked out between you?
It's alphabetical, but
that's the mystery.
But we also had a discussion with the editor that it needed to be an ampersand rather than an and, because I was a screenwriter first, and ampersand means we wrote it together, and means we each took our own pass at it. And I'm like, no, we wrote this together. I'm not going to be the cleanup guy for Kitten Face Berk here. So, the names are listed in alphabetical order, but the ampersand is essential.
I am a librarian by training, so alphabetical order is important. I thought you were going to tell them it was like we had a fight.
I'm saving the fight story for later.
See, the thing, what I wanted to do was on our author bios, I wanted it to say Josh Berk is a pen name for Saundra Mitchell and Saundra Mitchell is a pen name for Josh Berk. That way, even though my name is listed first, that's actually Saundra, because her pen name is Josh Berk and my pen name is Saundra Mitchell. It's very confusing.
What I can do in the editing for folks that are watching this on YouTube is I can put Saundra's face over you when you're speaking and your face over Saundra when she's speaking. And
totally edit us all around. Post-production. Definitely do that.
Well, then, I'm going to have you both
Snapchat face swap.
Yeah, I mean, there should be an app for that, just the author face swap. If not, that sounds like a huge market. People should be getting on that.
Yeah.
If we hold real still, it should make it easier.
Okay.
Hold still.
Really, future generations get it exact perfect. So where I usually start is because I'm terrible. I try never to summarize people's bios and people's books. Because if I summarize your book, 1, how painful for you to sit there and listen to me do that. But 2, I'll spoil it. And if I say your bio, I'm definitely going to leave something out. So I'm going to ask Saundra to start because I know she is a Hoosier, and Hoosiers get top preference on Middle Grade Ninja. That's just the way of it. So Saundra,
I'm part Hoosier.
Oh, really?
That's true.
My mom's from Randolph County.
All right, well, that gives you some second going street cred.
I used to go there every summer. I spent every summer in Randolph County. We spent a lot of time in Muncie. I have family in Muncie. I have family in Farmland, the city, town. It's not a city. It's a town. It's a farmland. I have family in Farmland. I love Indiana. Saundra can go first anyway. After you, Saundra.
Oh, well, go ahead, Saundra.
Oh, yes. No. You go ahead. This is going to get too confusing.
My name is Saundra Mitchell. I grew up on the east side of Indianapolis. I now live on the south side of Indianapolis, and I am the author of more than 17 books for young adults and middle grade readers. Some of them are nonfiction. I have 3 anthologies because I like to ask my favorite authors to tell stories for me, just me, and then I share them with people. I am the co-author of Camp Murderface with Kitten Face Berk here. Kitten Face, whom I've known for many, many years, still has never bothered to give me a nickname. This is why I had to throw glass at him the first time we met in person.
Yeah.
And yeah. And here's the thing. We have an interesting, somewhat tangled origin story because Josh's first book, The Dark Days of Hamburger Halpin, was supposed to come out in 2009, which is when my first book, Shadowed Summer, came out. And then he smelled funny and we kicked him out of the clubhouse and kicked his book to the next year, to 2010. And so the group that we were initially all in, because we were all in 2009, we kind of became the mentors to the 2010 group. And so I don't even remember meeting Josh, simply that Josh wasn't, and then Josh was. It was like, oh, like let there be Josh.
So is your life divided into BJ and AJ before Josh and after Josh?
Yes, definitely. And we were both nominated for an Edgar Award for our first novels. We have lots of friends in common, and like I said, it's like there wasn't Josh, and then there was Josh. There has always been Josh.
I like to say we go back to being LiveJournal friends. I like to tell people that.
Yeah.
To make it clear how long ago on the internet we were friends.
Before the Russians owned LiveJournal. Before the Russians owned LiveJournal, we were LiveJournal friends.
Yeah.
Is LiveJournal still around? Is that even a thing anymore?
It still exists, but it's not really used very much anymore. Not by Americans anyway, because everything that was to do with fan fiction essentially fled because Russia has interesting censorship laws. And so we were all like, bye. And so now, there are people that use it as a journal. I think Neil Gaiman still has a live journal, but I don't think he uses it. It's one of those weird things. Maybe Amanda Palmer makes him use it. That's entirely possible. That could be like one of the things that they torture each other with. Go post on LiveJournal.
Josh, I turn to you next. What is your overview and background? And also, please tell us the story about how you met Saundra and possibly got some glass chucked at you.
Yeah, so I am from Pennsylvania. I live in Bethlehem, PA, out the eastern part of the state near Jersey, north of Philadelphia. I come from a family of librarians. My mom was a librarian at Lehigh University and then at Moravian College here in Bethlehem. My dad was the director of the public library.
I didn't know that we were doing family histories. Because my dad was a custodian and my mom is a dental technician, since that seems to be important.
Ooh, bio slam.
It's important to.
Fair enough.
It's important to my origin story. It's important to the origin story of author Josh Berk. Everyone's. But I had 2 librarians for parents, so it's a fact that I always like to share. People. I like to, with the kids, I always tell them that. I always say, can you imagine that? Growing up with 2 librarians in the house. And it really was like it was a cool way to grow up. I was surrounded by books, and it was part of my life growing up. And then I was a little lost, but I ended up working in the library, and then also always found a way to do writing. I did a lot of journalism and other types of writing while working at libraries. And then I was always kind of playing with a novel here and there. And then I went to graduate school at the University of Pittsburgh. And I had some really great literature courses, some professors who taught the classics of YA, but also like the modern exciting stuff that was happening in YA at the time. So that would have been, 15 years ago now. But it's when I read Laurie Holt Anderson and Walter Dean Myers, and right before John Green's first book came out, I guess. And so I started to get like really interested in that world. It felt like the writing I was already doing kind of fit into it, even though I didn't think that's what I was doing when I started writing novels. I didn't think I was writing young adult books. But once I took that class and discovered that world, I got really interested in it, and wrote a few before I had any success. But really, really found my niche and found my joy writing for kids and teens. And when my first book came out, 2009, it was originally slated for, and then it got bumped to 2010 for whatever reason. But it was so great being part of those debut author communities that were, and still are, a real supportive group of other writers. It's such a weird new world, when you first go into it, looking back on it. I'm really thankful to have people like Saundra and some of the other authors I met at that time. And, some of it was career advice, and some of it was just talking you down off a ledge, and a lot of it was just joking around. Saundra and I just kind of like immediately realized we had a similar sense of humor, and we would make little funny videos together to promote our books, or we would do like little. We interviewed each other for our blogs. Like we just did little funny things to try to, just promote ourselves while having fun being creative with one another. And that was a decade ago. It's crazy. Yeah. That was quite a long time ago. And then I had I like the way we were talking about the other day. Saundra was like, well, Josh had an opening in his schedule, and I was like, I just couldn't get anything published. Like that's what it wasn't that I had an opening. It's a much better way to put it.
But he makes it sound like he wrote one book and then it was like no, he had like six books. He had like six books and then a gap.
I had a gap. Yes, I did have a gap. And Saundra and I were goofing around. We had moved from LiveJournal to Facebook and MySpace and eventually Twitter. And we were joking around on Twitter. Saundra, maybe you can tell better than I can. I don't even remember how the phrase Camp Murderface came up, but the title came up first. I mean, that's really that was the very first thing was, I'm sure we had kind of entertained the idea of maybe working together on something in the back of our minds, but the phrase Camp Murderface just came up in Twitter conversation.
I don't know that we had really actually thought about working together. We always goofed around a lot on Twitter, and like Sarah Oakler, who wrote 20 Boy Summer, like she was always in the mix, and Z Brewer, they were always in the mix, and it was just a lot of late night goofing off, and entertaining each other. And Josh said something about that he was going to murder face somebody. And I thought that murder face was like the most hilarious word that I had ever heard. And like we were all just riffing that night. And I said, Josh, we should write a book called Camp Murderface. And he's like, so what happens? Does everybody get murder faced? And Z Brewer is like, every single person gets murder faced. Get me in there. And we joked about it for like 2 hours, and you can still find like the tweet thread if you search for Murderface and us on Twitter. But we were just goofing off, and I had gone in a couple of different directions because I was also trying to figure out like just where the market was, because young adult moves very quickly, and like you could be writing like the hottest genre in the world, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, that's over now. And so if you can't pivot, then you kind of find yourself lost. And, I have pivoted and pivoted and pivoted. But one of the things, like I have done middle grade nonfiction. I have done anthologies. I have done write for hire. I have written my own novels. And one of the things that I had not done was write middle grade fiction, and I hadn't done a collaboration. And so, you know, it had been a while. Like I'd had almost a 2.5, 3-year gap between selling my last thing. And I was just thinking about, you know, what can I do next and what would be fun to do next? And I'm like, what if we really did write Camp Murderface? It was just like, wouldn't that be hilarious? So I sent Josh email and I'm like, what would happen if we really did write Camp Murderface? And so, you know, he, like I said, he had a gap. I had a gap. And we didn't go into it with like a whole lot of like super planning or super thought. Like we came up with like some like general guidelines, but mostly what we were doing is like, I would write a chapter and he would write a chapter. And the goal was to entertain each other. I mean, you know, it was, you know, we were trying to make each other laugh. You know, Josh is, well, he's not so much anymore, but he started out a real horror weenie. And so, like, I was, you know, I would try to scare him and give him nightmares. And so, like, we were literally just, we were having a good time putting together this thing that was basically full of all of the stuff that we liked, you know, in books and stuff when we were kids, which was in the 80s. So you end up with a, you know, a horror comedy summer camp romp set in 1983. And, you know, we finished the whole book before our agents even knew we were doing it. It was one of those things where it really was like, hey, we're going to write this book and we're just going to have a good time doing it. And then we got to the end and we had a book and we're like, so like, should we sell it? Should we maybe tell our agents?
There's a possibility you guys were just having fun, just with just friends prowling around.
Yeah, I mean, I had so much fun writing the first book, which is not to say I didn't have any fun writing the second book, but the second book was different because the first book was just, we're goofing off and we have no idea where it goes. The second book is under contract, so it's like, okay, now we have a deadline.
Yeah, a little different. And I was like, I mean, not to be like overly dramatic about it, but I was like pretty close to like giving up on writing in general, because I had written a couple books that didn't sell. I had written a book that was kind of like very like near and dear to my heart, very, very personal. And it was kind of like putting a lot of myself out on the page, and it was a little painful to write, and I was so proud of it when I was done with it. And then, as happens sometimes, no one bought it, you know. And I was like, I don't know if I had the in me to go sit down again and like, you know, beat myself up again and try to pump myself up to get through the hard parts and try to like, you know, just. I'm not a person who like, I don't like the blank page, but I also, it's not always a walk in the park, you know. Sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it's lonely, and sometimes, depending on the subject matter, you're digging deep, you know. And I was like, ugh, I just went through all that, and nothing came of it. I'm like, I don't know if I have it in me to do it again. I mean, and then, you know, at that time, that's when then that conversation with Saundra started, and I was like, you know what, this is going to be a lot more fun. The absolute worst case scenario is that I'm going to get to like just make funny words with Saundra for a couple of months. Like, it's not painful. It's fun. So, and I had done some collaboration. I'd done some other type of collaborative works in the past, some script projects, and I'm a musician, so like I always play in bands, and I'm super used to. I'd much prefer jamming with someone than playing alone, you know? So when it came to time to do that in the writing world, I was like, yeah, this is going to be fun. And it was. And it was not at all, like I said, even if the worst thing that would have happened would be if it didn't sell, and who cares? It was still really fun to do. And then, lo and behold, the book sold, the sequel sold. And the very first time we talked in person was to discuss the details of the deal. That was the very first time we had a conversation.
And like, or the first time just on the project of the book?
No, just the first time ever. like we had talked on the internet, like in Twitter and stuff like that, email, but we had like never talked on the phone, no video chat, no nothing, none of that.
I was gonna say I didn't know what your voice sounded like, but I did because I've seen your YouTube videos. But I only knew I've never talked.
Well, we knew what our voices sounded like because we did those videos. But the thing about the videos early on is that we would write the script, and then Josh would record all of his parts, and then I would record all of mine, and then I put it together in a Machinima program. So even though we had heard each other's voices, we had never actually talked to each other. We had just individually like acted out a script and then put it together.
You're like De Niro and Pacino and Pete.
So many ways. That's true.
Sure. Aren't we all a little like Al Pacino?
Definitely.
So Josh, not to derail you, but since you're being so honest, you said that you were thinking about quitting, and this is what you said, 6 books that you'd had published by this point, and you've won a People's Choice Award.
She was rounding up. I've published 4 books. I had four books published, and I was part of some anthologies.
No, you had Hamburger Helpman, you had Guy Langman, and then you had 3 baseball books.
Just 2 baseball. The 3rd baseball book didn't sell, so there was only 2.
Oh, I guess I thought it was 3 because it was 3 thirds. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, the title is confusing because it's called Strike 3 or Dead, but that was the first book in the series. I should have called it Strike 1. And then I could have kept going. I started with Strike 3. I don't know. But yeah, so I have 4 books in. Yes. What was the question? I
just wanted to clarify for all the authors listening who think I'm the only person who ever feels this way, that there you are 4 books in and you're thinking that maybe it's time to stop writing and just focus on baseball and doing the library full time, or?
Yeah.
I got to tell you, after my first book, I couldn't sell anything. And I was like, well, I guess I'm just one and done. And it was, my agent ended up firing me after my first book. And which was not something I realized could happen, but in retrospect, and I was like, well, I'm done. I guess this is it. And, but then I wrote another book and I got another agent, and, I'm very dumpster ratty. I climbed to the top of the dumpster repeatedly. And I mean, there have been multiple points in my career where I'm like, well, I guess I'm done now. I guess I've gotten as far as I can possibly get, and I'm just never going to sell anything again. But I keep stupidly writing things and giving them to my agent, and he keeps ultimately selling something eventually.
Well, 16 books ago that this idiot agent fired you and has been regretting it ever since, right?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is that she fired me, and then I got nominated for the Edgar Award, and then she said, maybe I spoke hastily. And I said, actually, I've already signed with somebody, which I had not.
Wow.
But by God, I was not going to go back to somebody who had fired me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I had a line on an agent. In fact, the agent who is my agent now, it wasn't like I was just like jumping with no net, but it was, it's like you never get those moments where you get to say, actually, no, forget you. But I don't know any author who hasn't had those dark nights of the soul repeatedly. It's just hard sometimes. It is a hard business, and I have described it a lot of times, like when I'm at school visits, as I play the lottery for a living, because there's no guarantee that I will ever sell another book ever again. And, if every book takes 3 to 6 months to do, and then like 3 to 6 months or longer to sell. And I play the lottery for a living, and it is a cruel and unkind lottery at that, because, not only do you write the book and then hope that it sells, even when it does sell, then you hand over something that you've put all of your everything into to lots of people who are going to receive it in the spirit in which it was intended, and lots of people who are going to be really angry and hate you a lot because it wasn't their book. I mean, it's a weird job. So it's nice to actually do it, with somebody.
Well, let me direct this question to you, since I know, Josh, the answer for you is when you're feeling low, Saundra Mitchell appears in a golden light and says, "Come with me, Josh. I will lift you out of this and bring you to Camp Murderface." But Saundra, when you're feeling low and there's no Josh coming out of the clouds, what keeps you going?
I don't want to get a real job. Seriously, this is the only thing that I've actually ever been genuinely good at. And I have worked in lots of jobs, but unlike Josh, whose parents set a fantastic example for him and set him off into college, into a world of, excellent jobs with, good jobs with benefits and pension plans. I was poor as dirt growing up, so I only have a high school diploma. So for me, Josh, has a master's degree and could get lots of different kinds of jobs, which is not to say that he would enjoy those jobs, but he would be paid more than $7.65 an hour to do those jobs. Whereas if I go out and get a job, I have a high school diploma, so I would be working, a minimum wage job, and I am older and I have a spinal cord injury, and I would, if I did not write for a living, I would be living entirely off of my wife, and that I can't do that.
Oh, I can. I don't, but I would have no problem should it come up.
She talks about, it's like, hey, when you make it big, I will totally quit my job. And it's like, okay, well, you keep encouraging me to make it big, and I will continue to write books about haunted summer camps, and we'll see what happens.
Well, this is it. Here we are, Middle Grade Ninja Podcast, top of the world, Ma. Here we go. Well, let's see. I've got more questions for both of you. I also want to talk a lot about Camp Murderface.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Camp Murderface, and we'll circle back, because I want to ask you about being a phone psychic, but I'm going to tease it.
Okay.
Esteemed audience, you hang on with us, and we'll talk phone psychics before we're done. But right now, let's talk Camp Murderface. So I vowed not to summarize your book and make you listen to it. Josh, I feel like I'm gonna turn this over to you, since it's your name first, right here on the book. Fair enough. If you want to tell the esteemed audience kind of the elevator pitch, what is Camp Murderface about?
So it's about two kids in 1983. We decided to set the book in Ohio, since it's halfway between Pennsylvania and Indiana. So it's 1983. It's a summer camp in Ohio. There's two kids, each dealing with their own stuff at home, end up being a little bit of misfits at camp, and then end up being friends, and then begin discovering all sorts of lore around this camp that turns to be more fact than fiction. They see some ghosts. They see haunted faces screaming in the campfire, and they start to hear and uncover stories about these creatures called vampire devils that live at the bottom of the lake, and that are. Is that okay? Am I doing okay, Saundra?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm like afraid that I'm doing a bad job summarizing the story.
No, I was whispering blood.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I thought you were saying no. I thought maybe I was like giving away something that wasn't supposed to be given away.
No.
Okay. No. The vampire devils they do come up later in the story, but they're okay to be part of the picture. So our two characters, their names are Corinne and Tez, and they start to uncover these hauntings at camp. And Corinne is she's kind of like a very she's super into her BMX bike. She's a little bit of She's a little bit of a tough girl. Tez is like, we think that like in the future, Tez invents Wikipedia. Like that's what he does in the future. In 1983, he's just like a walking dictionary. He's a super smart kid who knows too much about everything except for when to be quiet. And he and Corinne then become sort of unlikely buddies, and they, it's up to them to sort of get to the bottom of this this haunting at the bottom of the lake, and that this evil at the core of camp. The camp is actually called Camp Sweetwater. That's the name of the actual camp. It's on a lake, but there's been some bad stuff that happened there in the past, and over time, as a joke, campers call it Camp Murderface. That's like the sort of jokey name that the past counselors call it, and that our crew then ends up adopting as the nickname. So I always feel like I have to. The name of the camp in the story is not actually Camp Murder. That's just what the kids call it, sort of as a joke. But it's based. We did.
That is an important point, because right away the audience is going to think, I'm not reading about these characters. They should definitely not go to Camp Murderface.
Why would you send your kids there? Why would you read that on the brochure and then write a check and the whole thing?
We had to fight for that title. We did, because the publisher was like, do we think maybe that Murderface is a little too intense? And we're like, no. And they're like, do you think maybe that Murderface might turn off the gatekeepers? And we're like, librarians laugh when we say Camp Murderface.
Everyone does. Yeah.
Kids are excited. Librarians laugh. But we did almost all the way up to the point where they made the cover for the first book. It was they continued to be like, what if we called it Camp Dead Face? And what if we called it
Scary Face?
Yeah. What if we call it these
Face?
kids go to camp and it's actually not that extreme? It was just
Camp, just manslaughter face.
Yeah.
No, I think a murder face is perfect. It's that perfect mix. I don't sell you guys on this. You're with me. But it's that nice mix of promises you're gonna get some real scary stuff here, but it's face in it, so it's not gonna be that scary. It's a safe kind of
It's gonna be silly. It's definitely gonna be silly. And we did have to go back and make it less scary when we did revisions. Which is funny because I wrote it. Josh was kind of like the architect of the funny, and I was kind of the architect of the horror, because I started out writing horror fiction, and Josh has always been super funny. And so like I did my best to like make up jokes. It's like, I'm going to try and make Josh Berk laugh. But like kind of my job was to like do the horror parts, because Josh would be like, I don't know what they do. I don't know what happens. It's scary. And so like early on, I wrote some of the horror parts that his character experiences. Although that's out the window now. Josh is all in for writing super scary parts now. And so when I wrote it the first way, and then we gave it to our agents, and our agents were like, what about more feelings? Is this scary enough? Can we put in more feelings and scary enough? And we're like, it's a book called Camp Murderface. I think it's fine. But we went ahead and did the revisions. And then once they were happy, they submitted it. And Kristen Pettit at Harper Children's, she bought it. And she is also, or she was also, R.L. Stine's editor for many of the early Goosebumps books.
Kristen, if you're listening, you are invited on the show anytime. I would love to chat with you about both those things.
And yeah, he's awesome. And she said, okay, well, we've learned two things working on Goosebumps. One, everything in the past has to be at least 100 years ago, so it's not too scary. But also this book is too scary, so I need you to make it less scary. So we put in more scary for the agents. The editor made us take out some of the scary. And even then, at like line edit parts, she was like, do we really have to say blood 4 times on this page?
It
yes.
Pretty vivid.
I got you.
Yeah. And that's the toned down version. But yeah, also I have no, like, because like Saundra said, like, I'm a big baby. I don't like scary books. I don't like scary movies. I am afraid of everything. So I'm like writing in a genre. I mean, I'm bringing my own sense of storytelling and my own sense of comedy and everything to it. But yeah, I'm not totally sure where the lines are. So because I'm not super familiar with the genre. So certain parts, I'm just like, well, I guess I'll make it scarier. I would just make it so gross that like, that's just too gory. Like that's just too much. Like you gotta tone it down. So I mean, for me, honestly, like I feel like as an example, it's maybe like a cheesy example, but like I feel like the Harry Potter books are really scary in the scary part. Like I felt like, to me, I was like, just if you're as scary as the Dementor or as Umbridge or like some of the death and scary sad in Harry Potter, then that's the most beloved children's book ever. So if that's your, but I think people forget how scary. I don't know, maybe they do, but it made
I
an
would
impact
argue
on me.
scary is part of what makes them so popular and so great.
Yeah, and I think it slides under the transom for a lot of kids, where that's really their first time where they're like, I mean, Dudley Dursley is ridiculous, but he's also really scary to Harry Potter. And then as it moves on, it's like, Cedric Diggory dies in front of him. And then Umbridge has that pen. It's like, and the Dementors, just straight up the Dementors.
Right.
There are really terrifying parts in those books, and everybody remembers the magic and the action and the adventure and everything else. They don't remember the scary parts. When I'm writing,
and because they're British, I don't know.
Yeah, they're British.
Spoiler for Cedric Diggory for a book that's 10 years old.
Yeah, no, sorry. If you have not gotten to the end of Goblet of Fire, I apologize.
Somewhere out there is a listener. I love the Middle Grade Ninja podcast, but I just haven't got around to Harry Potter yet. And now I won't. Thanks, Saundra Mitchell.
Sorry.
We cost J.K. Rowling a book sale.
She's hurting now.
She's suffering now.
1 book out of 8.
So, okay, you mentioned, Saundra, that his character. So, did you guys, one of you picked Corinne, one of you picked Tez, and you went back and forth, or how did this collaboration back and forth go?
Yeah, it was, I would write a chapter or 1,000 words, and then Josh would write a chapter or 1,000 words, and we would just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That pattern doesn't stay true simply because when you revise, you have to go back, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to have something from somebody. Where were we, Josh? Give us a quick tour. You turned your camera around. Now he's silent. Okay. The silence is what really makes podcasts exciting.
I was having technical difficulties, and I was trying to fix it, and I hit the wrong button. That's the story of my life.
But, we just went back and forth in large part because we were like, hey, this book is only going to be 45,000 words because it's middle grade. And if you write 1,000 and I write 1,000, we'll be done with this book in a month and a half. And 3 months later, we had a 60,000 word book. And then after revisions with our agents, we had a 68,000 word book. And then after revisions with our editor, it's back down to about 64,000 words. But yeah, we each took a character. And have you read it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, who do you think wrote which character?
I, having met you in person, felt that there was. I felt that some of the things Corinne said were very Saundra type things to have said. I figured a minor spoiler, but it's one of my favorite introductions of Elliot, who she recently kissed. That sounded like a Saundra Mitchell joke to me, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. Josh wrote Corinne.
Oh, there you go. Dead wrong. This is why I don't summarize people's books or play this game.
No, we love
asking because neither of our agents guessed which one of us wrote which part. None of my family figured out who wrote which part. Now, I will say that, when we revised, we were both, and even when we were writing, I would be typing in a new chapter because we were working in Google Docs. And so, because Alphabet needs more money, right? I would be, typing down here in generic docs, and Josh would be in the chapter before or whatever, going through, and he, would be fine tuning jokes or adding, funny things or whatever. And, I would go through and I would fine tune the horror and stuff like that. So ultimately, I feel like the book has a overall pretty consistent voice and feel, and that's because we both went over each other's work just over and over. There are jokes that we can't remember who wrote it.
There's a lot.
I will say though that Josh did write the Elliot's Kiss. That is all Josh.
Well, that's my son's name, so that's who wrote that.
So we thought that would be So yeah, it was one of those things where, and it's fun because I have written a male POV character, but older. I've never written one this age. And so, sometimes when Josh writes something, I'm like, no, I'm sorry. 11-year-old girls would never do that like that. Then he'll change it. And occasionally there's no, 11-year-old boys would never do that. Not to spoil the
some really really specific things inside a boys' locker room or
yeah, it's for example, it's I told Josh that 11-year-old girls are not gonna snipe at each other the way they've been sniping each other and then just be okay. That's just not the way it works. And there was
boys would boys do that. Yeah.
You forget about it the moment you're in through the bathroom door.
And then in the second book, there's this part where I was joking about one guy who couldn't decide whether or not it was okay to wear underpants under his swimsuit. And Josh was like, in my experience, boys don't wear them under there and they don't really care. And I'm like, well, will it make sense if this one weird guy is weird about it, or do I just need to change the whole thing?
We kept it in. I felt like one weird guy, as long as they acknowledge that it's weird. I felt like that was.
Yeah, everybody just, it was because he is one weird guy. And I also raised the possibilities, what if minnows swim up there? Our editor may take it out.
That felt right. That felt right. I will say, at the very, very beginning, I think we sort of, I don't know if we've been named the characters yet, but I think I remember us texting or emailing, and I just said, so I guess I'll write the guy and you write the girl, unless, and I just put ... just kind of as a joke, And Saundra was like, hey, I'm up for taking the dude if you want to swap it up. And I said, I'd never written as a female character before. So, but everything about this was kind of new and challenging and different. And I was like, you know what? Why not do something different than what I've done thus far? And, she's I didn't want to make her a tomboy, really. I didn't want to make her too much, just too much of a guy character just as a girl. So I tried to, and then of course I did have a co-author who's a woman, so I had a good insight there. But Corinne is very much she's very much rough and tumble in her way, and
she's very much she's very much like basically every 11-year-old girl right before they discover being attracted to people. Once puberty starts to hit, it's this heat-seeking missile that just leaves destruction in its wake, no matter your gender. And 11-year-old girls are very Corinne until somebody gets a crush on somebody, and then it's now you're too much of a baby. It's just everybody's very worried about being grown up when you're 11, and now that we're in our 40s, we would very much like to be 11.
Yeah. And one of the things that I read really early on, just doing a little bit of just real Googling, basic searching about what was popular in Ohio in 1983. I was just looking at newspapers or magazines or something online, and I found this thing about BMX, about the BMX scene. And I was like, oh, and I have a lot of friends who grew up in the BMX scene. That was huge here in Pennsylvania. My friends were X Games people and stuff. So I felt like, I'm gonna make Corinne like super into BMX, and that sort of influenced her character in a way, like that she had this fearlessness, and she had this, because you got to be tough, you got to be brave, you got to be physical and strong and fearless to be, taking jumps on your bike, and so that's that like one detail I felt like kind of helped shape her character. So, and then Tez, like we said, he is just like he's just like a human encyclopedia. Yeah, he is. I love Tez. Like, and so the funny part that Saundra wrote, like, if people think I wrote them, I'm so like, I feel kind of guilty, but also I feel so pleased because the Tez parts that are so funny. They're so funny that like it just cracks me up every time I read them, and I'm proud to proud to trick people into thinking I wrote them. So, well, yeah, we made a point of not saying to anybody who wrote what. We made a point of just like secretly writing across the gender lines.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad. Honestly, I'm glad it's that way, and that it is so difficult for people to tell. It's way more fun. So, how do you keep characters consistent since you're working on a shared? It's not a shared universe. It's a single universe that you're sharing. I think is how that works. Whatever. How do you keep your characters straight? And then also, did you sit down and make out a plot? Or are you guys pantsing this just back and forth like a game of telephone?
First of all, we keep things. This is how we keep things in order. Josh writes something, and I say, "Hey, that can't happen because remember on this page this happened."
Yeah, we're a mix of plotters and pantsers.
Yeah.
So Saundra kept the continuity. Got it.
Yeah. I mean, Josh also, I mean, it was very collaborative in that sense, but a lot of times I did feel like I was like, no, that can't happen because of this and this.
I'm glad because I just think something's funny and I just go with it. I forget that it makes no sense. that's not good. It's good to have you, it's good to have someone double checking it. So, and then what we would typically do is like once a week, or every other week, a Sunday morning, not too early, we would just like get a cup of coffee and we'd chat. We would just use like I'm not on the phone, but just in like the Google Messenger or whatever, which we like because it saves it, and then you can go back and look. So we would sort of spend the week plotting out the next couple chapters. So we would have a sense of where we wanted the next 3-4 chapters to go. And then one of us would go write them. We'd go write them and back and forth. And then we'd get to a point where like, okay, what happens next? And then we'd meet again in real time and collaborate and try to sort of brainstorm out. And sometimes, we would, what about this? Or like, wait, no, that won't work. So we would plan a few chapters at a time and then reconvene and plan the next section. So.
But when we say that, like, we were planning it, it's not like we were breaking it down in like any real big way.
Yeah, it's not.
Like, we have a table of contents at the top, and before each chapter was written, there were no titles. So it would be like, Tez and Corinne have a fight, or, Corinne steals the bike or whatever. And so like, we would just have like these one line, this is what happens in this chapter. It was like very bare bones. Like, this is how you plot a novel. I mean, it's just, it would follow like, okay, so this is something that we have to plug in at this point. And we have multiple documents, like, because if we said stuff that was like really funny or we felt like it was really inspired in our chat, we would paste it in that document, or sometimes we would paste it in the actual manuscript document just so it was sitting there when we started to write. But there were times where either something had changed, and so then like the 5 one-liners that we had written down no longer made sense. Or, it was fun. There was one where we had like just the one-liners on there, and it was toward the end of writing the second book. And Josh texted me, because when we finish a chapter, we go like, tag, you're it. And that's like the code to go read the chapter now and now write yours. And Josh texted me one morning. I was like, great chapter. By the way, what does one-liner about my chapter mean? I don't remember what happens. So it's not like super detailed planning. It's more like, this is the trajectory of this story. And we'll see what happens. And I think that's part of what makes it a lot of fun, because I don't know exactly what Josh is going to write. I just know that, plot point has to happen. I have no idea how he's going to approach it. I have no idea what jokes he's going to write, or if he's going to throw in horror. I have no idea. And he doesn't know what I'm going to do either. And so I think that really puts a lot of life into these stories, because there is that really fun tension of, we didn't know what was going to happen either until we got there.
And sometimes
you saved the original Twitter thread and the messenger and everything, so that when the special edition comes out, 10 years from now, 10-year anniversary edition, put all that stuff in the back. That's gold.
The problem is that most of the jokes that are in the planning are completely inappropriate for middle grade.
Oh, some of those can't go in.
Carefully curated special edition.
We call that the director's cut of Camp Murderface.
There's a lot of director's cut material. And sometimes I'll say, like, sometimes we'll kind of run each other into a corner, just sort of to be mean or just to be funny or whatever. I'll end a chapter and I'll just be like, and then I had the greatest idea, and then I just get to stop, and then Saundra what the idea is. Like,
yeah, he did one chapter where, like, he was supposed to be writing a scary scene, and apparently his characters or he himself decided that it would be more fun for them to all just, like, goof on each other. So, like, the chapter is, like, all of them goofing on each other. Then they get to the scary thing, and it's like, and then there was a crack. So it's like, so now I have to write the chapter that he was going to write. Because he thought it was funnier to have his characters goof on each other.
So when you, obviously everyone who's listening to this hears how well you collaborate and work together. Seamless. It's like one mind speaking through two mouths. It's incredible. But I assume somewhere along the line, you had to have butted heads at some point. Somebody wanted to zig instead of zag. Somebody wanted a character to do this, and somebody wanted that. How did you resolve that? How for all those authors who want to have a successful collaboration like yours, how did you make sure this never came, obviously it wouldn't come to blows because you're not in the same state, but make sure everything stays civil and nobody's resentful.
We never argued over anything. There was never a point where we argued over anything. And I think part of that is that we've both been just really conscious of each other as artists, which sounds kind of pretentious. But, like, there have been ideas that I've had that we had to throw away. There have been ideas that Josh has had that, that we've either had to put aside or that we couldn't use. I mean, it was, like, super hilarious or super amazing, but it just didn't fit to where the story ended up going. And, like, we'll write stuff in and, like, we'll leave each other notes. It's like, does this work? I don't know. Are we cramming too much stuff in here? And I think that we've been really honest with each other. It's like, if that doesn't work, then we go back and do it. Like, there have been places where, like, I was in a bad place. My dad passed away while we were working on the first one. And I was determined that we were going to hit that deadline. And it's like, we are not going to miss a deadline. And Josh is like, who cares about a deadline? And I'm like, this is when we had revisions. This was after the book was sold. And it's like, I'm like, I don't miss deadlines. And he's like, who cares? It doesn't matter. And, there were places where he could tell that I was not in the best place to be writing horror and or comedy. And, and he would just go back in and he would tweak it and, bring it back in line with what we had intended to do. Because we both plan, we both know what we want the book to be ultimately. And, there have been times when Josh has been down and that, we just, a thing doesn't work. And it's just like, well, why don't, I feel like a lot of times I'm like mean mommy, and I'm like, Josh is like, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And I'm like, not right now. We have to eat our exposition vegetables. But we save stuff for other books. Like, Josh had a super great idea, and I know he loved it, and he really, really wanted it to be in book 2. And And I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's going to be very important in book 3. And it was just that book 2 was already like so crammed full of stuff. It's like, I don't see how we can fit this in here and make it actually work. But I mean, we've had conversations, like we've had check-in meetings where it was just like, you know, are you feeling okay? You know, how's your mental health? You know, are you upset about this? Am I steamrolling over you? Am I not doing enough work? We've just been really honest about, like where we are just as people and, you know, any of our fears or vulnerabilities about how the book is going or, you know, all of that stuff, because it's important. And so I don't think we've ever argued over anything. I think the only thing that we ever really even came close to being like super disagree about was which voice actors would be doing Camp Murderface, because I really wanted Tara Sands, who is fantastic. And Josh was like, but I really kind of like this one. And I was like, but I really like Tara Sands. And he was like, but I really kind of like that one. And ultimately what we did was like, all right, look, we're just going to have to pick 2 that go together. Otherwise it doesn't make sense. So if you win, great. If I win, great. But we're going to agree on it. It's just like with the covers. It's like, if somebody feels really strongly about something, I think both of us have been very good about it. It's like, dude, if that matters to you, then go for it. I don't care. So I wouldn't say it's been egoless, because it makes it sound like we're pretentious people to start with. But I think it's been genuinely empathetic. I mean, we really like each other, you know, as people. I mean, yes, you know, we call each other names and we goof off, and, you know, we are all kinds of dumb together. But I think, you know, the part that other people don't see is that we genuinely respect each other as writers. We genuinely care about how the other one feels. And we both want both of us to walk away really happy, having made something really amazing together. I could be wrong though, Josh. How do you feel about that?
No, that's
yeah, no pressure.
exactly
Tell her
right.
you hate her. After all the nice things she said.
That's exactly right, and very beautifully said. And you know, to answer the original question, like to other authors who want to work together, if you're thinking about like part of it, I could say a couple things that I think have like to the fact that it worked. But part of it, I'm honestly going to say is like Saundra said, like, well, we both wanted the same thing for the book. But like, how did that happen? I don't know. This is magical. I think part of it is like a little bit of just good fortune. Like it just really was fortunate, because our writing is not so. There was some significant degree of good fortune, or I honestly like to just call it magic, that happened in the very beginning, that we both like saw for what it could be and what it was going to be, and we immediately with like a big picture of it, and like little things around the edges maybe needed to be sorted out, but we both, and how, I don't know, maybe just like the phrase "Camp Murderface" is just funny, and it just paints a picture in your mind of what kind of book it's going to be. Or also, and our sensibilities overlap a lot. But then also, I will say, I think it's really good that we're not exactly the same kind of writer, because
yes,
I think that
neither one of us is like in each other's house. We're both in a really unfamiliar house together.
Yeah. And if I tried to collaborate with someone who was too much like me, I'm not sure it would work. I think it would like fall apart. And so we, you know, our complementary skills are really important, or just we're fortunate that they work together. And the other thing I'll say is that like, and it's not forced, but like we both constantly praise each other's work all the time. Like we're constantly just reading each other's chapters and just texting each other LOLs all the time. Like we're just constantly cracking up and like loving it. So then when Saundra tells me, she's like, the end of that chapter didn't work, I'm not like, oh, she's being mean. I'm like, because she backed it up with 25 things that she liked earlier. So I'm feeling comfortable, and I'm feeling feeling defensive and I'm not feeling, raw about it. I'm just like, oh, she must like it probably doesn't work because she's not nitpicking for the sake of it, like because we're always giving as much positive feedback, or as I don't know that it's not like we're it helps. Like we constantly are like cheering each other on like all the time.
Yeah.
Like sometimes literally like in the document, Saundra will be typing and I'll just be in the chat window like just like clapping, just like typing go and just like just like I don't know. I just am constantly amused by the stuff she comes up with, and so I'm just constantly cheering her on. So yeah, if at a point I'm just like, oh, that maybe we could make that a little tighter or something, whatever, a little note, like it doesn't feel hurtful because there's so much love preceding it. But yeah, also I will say that there is something really important too, and it's a little. I mean, I don't know if it's surprising or not, but it's like you would be shocked. One might be shocked to know like how much Saundra knows about my life. Like at this point, like writing this book together. I mean, we've had like it's become a really like close working relationship that like that goes way beyond the margin of the pages. So
yeah,
it has to be someone you can get along with and talk to as a person, in addition to the writing and the art. And yeah, and Saundra is a very empathetic person, I'll say, and also like she'll go out of her way to check in and like I feel like you can always tell. Like even if I don't say anything, you're just like, hey, you doing all right? like you can just tell by the quality of my, I don't mean quality like good or bad, but just the quality of my prose that day. You're like, Josh might have had a bad day at work. Like, and then you'll check in and you'll be like, tell me, like, are you all right? Like, and that's really meaningful to me. Like, it really makes you feel like supported, because when you're working with somebody, yeah, it can get, and I've been in bands for years, and like, it can get competitive, with the other guitarist, or it can be like, no, I want my lyric here, or, egos can be in the room. And yeah, I think also like at the point in our careers, I don't know that I would have been a good collaborator when I was in my like early 20s, because
I would not have been.
Yeah, I was like very sensitive, and I'm not ego driven, but like too insecure to take a note, And like now I'm just like, well, yeah, it's not personal. Just like either that part works or it doesn't. Like
yeah, and like even
either
early
way, we just want
on,
the same thing, which is to make it better.
Even early on, like like I said, like we will go through like the chapter that the person wrote before, and we'll just change things. And it's not like we're sending each other notes all the time saying, I changed this, I changed this, I changed this, I changed this. We find out that it got changed when we read back over it. We're not asking each other's permission to change every little thing. We're far enough along in our careers that we can trust each other, that, he's not going to throw something in there that I would find, offensive or upsetting, or it's like, what are you even doing? And and I feel like I don't do that to his characters either. I do think that a lot, like sometimes it will be like, or Josh will say something like, says something really tezzy here, or I'll say something, can you can you edit for Corinne's voice here? But a lot of times we're not even like giving each other critique. We're just like, yay, and like we're changing the things that need to be changed to make it work. And we don't find that out until like, we have to read it for revisions or whatever. No, I'm kidding. We find out before then, but
but sometimes
I know I could not have worked with another person like that early on in my career. I was a screenwriter before this, so like most of my career had been collaborative, but it had been collaborative in the sense of I wrote a screenplay and then everybody down the line screwed it up for me. And so I had a lot of bitterness and very like, I was very Gollum-like with like my early manuscripts. And I would not have been able to do Camp Murderface that early on, but I think we were both right at the exact same place, the right place where we can be like, it's not a personal reflection if I wrote too stiff a chapter,
It's good that you guys get along, because this is like about as close to being book married as you can, especially when book 2 comes out. It's a huge success, and you've got to write 5 more. It's good that this is working. At what point did you know that this was going to need at least a second book, if not more? When did this go from a one-off to series?
We pitched it when we decided to actually tell our agents that we had been doing this. We wrote like, and we basically like, here's the one we have all of, and then here's a paragraph and here's a paragraph. We like told our agents, it's like, we think it should be a trilogy. Because we felt like we had an overall arc and we had like an individual arc. And then our agents tried to sell it as a trilogy. And our editor was kind enough to buy 2 books. So, once we stopped like doing the fun part of writing the book and started working on the business part, it was very much, we think this should be 3 books. This is why. Here's the proposal for that. Here are other books that are, here are comp titles that we feel are very current, that this, feeds into without being, eclipsed by. It was, at that point, it was very, very business. But then when we sat down, what was great was that we knew that we were going to have to probably turn in a whole outline for the second book. We knew that like just the paragraph was not going to do it. So last spring, Josh and I actually sat down and we went ahead and we broke like the whole of book 2, because we knew generally what would happen. And so we, just kind of filled it in as like I don't know, how many pages was it? Do you remember?
No, it was a good sized outline. I mean, yeah, it was
probably around 10, 15 pages. I don't remember. Yeah. So, it was, a pretty good outline, which our editor promptly lost.
Yeah, we put a lot of work into that.
and the funny thing is that
she didn't lose the only copy, did she?
It's not that she lost it;
No.
it's that she forgot that we had turned it in.
Okay.
And so when she's like, "Is this the blurb that you guys had for the next book?" and it's like, "That's for book 3," and so like she had not even read it, but it's fine. She's a little flaky, but she's pretty fantastic, and
she is fantastic.
Still welcome on the show anytime.
But what was really nice about it is that when we first started Camp Murderface 2, when we were doing Camp Murderface 1, I was having a pretty hard time, aside from career stuff. And then when we started working on Camp Murderface 2 this year, Josh was having a pretty rough time. And, early on, Josh was like, I just feel bad. I feel like I'm not, doing as much work as I did on the last one. And I'm like, dude, past us did all of the work on this outline. So you already did all the work. So now it's just, all we're doing is sailing. And so even though neither one of us, we still like had our weekly meetings because, an outline is never how the book actually ends up. It was good to have had that, even though it ultimately made 0% of difference in the actual business side, because it gave us, some breathing room. And, because we both had hard times while working on these books. And, we both had the opportunity to just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to sit back and let you be awesome because I got nothing. And then we pick it back up and we have fun again.
Sounds like it's a match made in heaven. So you need to. Were you guys working on solo projects at the same time at any point? Any overlap, or was it 100% both of you focused going back and forth until the 2 murder faces were done?
Well, while I was working on Murderface 1, I was also working on curating and editing my all-out anthology. And I was also finishing and revising my novel that came out last October called All the Things We Do in the Dark, which was the really hard, terrible, painful novel that I wrote that it managed to sell, but nobody read it. So, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. And then during Camp Murderface 2, I have been busy at the same time curating and editing the companion to my first anthology, out now, which coincidentally comes out the exact same day that Camp Murderface does, which was actually a whole thing, because originally Camp Murderface 2 or Camp Murderface and Camp Murderface 2 were supposed to come out previous October and then in January. So they were supposed to be like 6 months apart and pushed back further. And that just, it didn't happen. We don't know why. They don't tell us things like that. And so then I had to ask permission from my other editor and our editor on Camp Murderface for these 2 books to come out, because one is, it's a young adult anthology, and the other one is a middle grade horror comedy, and the audiences could not overlap less. And so it's like, and I could have messed things up big time, because if Camp Murderface editor said, no, that's not okay with me, we would have had to go to the other publisher and be like, can you please move it so that I'm not in breach of contract? But it worked out. But now, so yeah, I'm always working on about 67 things because I'm afraid of being poor again.
Fair enough. Poverty is a great motivator.
Yeah. Also because I love writing and editing anthologies, but also because that's my job, and I don't want to have to go work in a place.
And Josh, you were being 100% faithful the whole time. You were zeroed in on Camp Murderface.
No, he wasn't.
No, he wasn't.
Yeah.
You were working on something. You had a side project also.
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty demanding day job, so that's like I have that. So, but I also, I think, I mean, while we were, there was a little time in between. I will say, like, while we've been writing the second book, that was at least, it seemed like part of it was like pretty quick turnaround. Like that was all I could do to keep up with like meeting those goals in order to get that book turned in on time. I mean, it was that was, I didn't have much breathing room to do anything else. And there was a little time in between the 2 books that I started writing, like a chapter book series for younger readers. That's not scary at all and is just totally silly, for kind of like Captain Underpants audience, like for like younger kids, like just full on silly books for 8-year-olds. So I've been working on that kind of. I have some weird writing habits too. Like part of that book, like I literally wrote like in my car, because like what I do is like I use the voice to text app in the notes, and I have this like character that I do, and I just like drive around and I talk as this character, and he has this really weird accent, and I just talk as him into my phone, and I narrate the like script, or whatever you want to say, the manuscript for that book. So I find ways to like write at like really odd times, like literally writing while driving in my car, not typing in my car, but just talking on my car. And
I bet you get your word count way up for the day if you're taking advantage of every moment you can like that.
He also writes in his sleep.
And you're stuck in traffic. I do also. We do have this. I do have a lot of like some sleep problems, which is not a great thing to have in life. I very often have insomnia, and I very often wake up in the middle of the night, or I'm just up in the middle of the night. And I wrote a lot of this book on my phone. I wrote a lot of both Murderface books on my phone, just the Google Docs app on my phone. And so a lot of times I'll just be like half asleep at night, and I'll just be typing. And sometimes I will fall asleep, but can somehow continue to type and wake up and find stuff. Very often it makes no sense. Like sometimes it's just like the letter A a whole bunch of times. Sometimes it's a word. But sometimes it's like sometimes it's like thoughts or sentences. There's at least one sleep, we call it sleep work, because every once in a while Saundra will be like, was sleep work in here again? It'll be like something really weird in the document.
Like, then, did you guys see the Spider-Man in the hat? And I'm like, where was the Spider-Man in the hat? I don't remember that being in the book.
Yeah, just like dream logic, just weird phrases. But the one thing I know did make it into Camp Murderface. There's a chapter titled, it's called Mr. Mystical. That's the name of the chapter. And that's when like Tez says something sort of believing in the supernatural. And after Corinne had been trying to convince him previously, and she says, when did you become Mr. Mystical? But Mr. Mystical was just something Sleepberg typed. I had no context for it whatsoever, but we found a way to keep it in. We found a way to keep it in the book and actually make it a chapter title. So that makes me really. That most of Sleepberg gets edited. Most of it gets edited.
Does Sleepberg have access to your social media accounts, or is there a way to shut that down?
No.
Just to be safe?
Yeah, no, not at all. I do write a lot of lyrics. Sleepwork is usually a good lyricist because I'll text my bandmate lyrics because they don't have to super make sense. They just have to sound cool. So Sleepwork is like pretty good at songwriting. More logic is required for writing a novel. So yeah, Sleepwork is like more of a lyricist. Occasional novelist. Yeah, but that does get your word count up when you're writing while driving and while sleeping and also while writing. So not all recommended habits, but sometimes gets the job done.
Sandra, are you more traditional get up 9 to 5, or how do you work?
I do have a scheduled day simply because up until my daughter just graduated.
Congratulations to her.
Yeah, I'm very excited for her. She's also very excited for herself. She's autistic, and so I have been her advocate throughout her entire school career. And so basically my actual, Josh has like a full-time job at the library. My actual full-time job is, getting services and everything that my daughter needs and making sure that, everything at school was going the way it was supposed to go, and, filling out lots and lots of government paperwork. And so, for really since my very first book, I have been doing all of that at the same time that I'm writing, but I have never been like a morning writer. My brain is not there yet. And so like I get up and I do like boring business stuff in the morning. Like I answer business emails and, and stuff that I have to fill out and that kind of stuff. And I do that until noon or so, and I have lunch, and then I'll write a little bit, but it's really more like going over what I wrote the day before, or in the case of Camp Murderface, it's reading through everything that Josh just wrote, so it's fresh on my mind, and like tweaking anything that I think needs tweaked to get me going. I don't really I'll write in the late afternoon, and sometimes I'll write it in the middle of the night. Given my preference, I would work all night and I would sleep during the day. But I mean, there have been times where, it's just like, well, I have a couple of hours on Sunday morning, so that's what I'm going to write. And it's always funny because a lot of times, if I start writing on the weekends, I will suddenly see the little icon on the top show up, and Josh Berk be creeping on me while I'm writing my chapter.
How much creeping is he able to do? He's just looking at what you're typing as you type it? Is he?
Yes, he's watching.
Peering at you through your webcam? How terrified should esteemed audience be?
Well, I mean, he's watching the words. There's no webcam involved.
I'm just watching the words.
The funny part is that I will pop in and I will see that he's writing, but if I've seen his cursor just sit there for a little while, maybe he had to go to a meeting or something like that, then I'll type in there so that when he comes back, he doesn't come back to what he wrote last.
Sometimes we'll be in the same chapter at the same time, the same paragraph at the same time.
Yeah, we will write over each other and stuff and like.
Oh, that just sounds like madness, but obviously it's working.
It is, but it works. My favorite though was we were both so glad to get out of the mushy middle of Murderface 2. And we were both like, really, for a long time there, it just felt like we were writing down words and they weren't even in order. And so once I get past like the part that I find difficult, I tend to write faster and faster and faster. And like I said earlier, we do like the, tag, you're it. And so like he had tagged me on like a Saturday morning and I'm like, all right, I can't wait to see what Josh wrote. And so I went and I read through his chapter. I'm like, all right, I can't wait to write my chapter. So I just, I sat there and I banged it out and then I tagged you're it. It was like a couple hours later and he's like, what's wrong with you?
I wanted a break. I wanted to not feel guilty. I wanted to
he was like, now I have 2 or 3 days while she thinks about things. And instead it was like,
2 or 3 hours.
Why was 1983 the year for this? And I have my suspicions, but I want you guys to answer. I've already been wrong, drastically wrong about the book once per podcast. It's all my heart can take. Why 1983? What stories influenced this story?
I mean, obviously, all the late 70s and the early 80s were like truly the heyday for horror films for this, before they just turned into just straight up slasher films, which I enjoy me a slasher film too. I'm not, talking. It's just like there's less story once you get to the point where it's just like, cut this guy's face off or we'll blow your head off with a shotgun. I mean, compelling.
I believe I've seen all 7 of the Saw films. They're great.
And, for me, it was very much about an aesthetic because by the time you get to 1984 and 85, all the vestiges of the 70s are gone. Really, you have really started to get into the very, like plasticine aesthetic of the 80s. It's like, it's very future, but it's also very plastic. And it's just, it does not have, like, the stories did not have the same feel by that point. And for me, when I'm like, I was like, I want to write, a horror comedy. The comedy part is like, that's part of how we can get away with setting it in 1983. Because if we went in and said, we just want to write a horror book, for kids set in 1983, they're going to be like, why? And so I wanted to bring it back to like right before everything got like super high aesthetic in the 80s. When everything was still weird, knobby knees and, a lot of the same aesthetic that Stephen King was pulling forth when he was doing Stand By Me and when he was doing It. Stephen King was a huge author for me at the time. And by the way, the very first time I babysat all by myself, I was 13 years old. And the book I took with me to read while I was babysitting on New Year's Eve was Pet Sematary by Stephen King. And that was a choice. And I really wanted, for me, 1983 felt like the place where it's like, that's the point at which you are scared out of your mind and also don't know enough to explain it away. That's what I wanted 1983 for. Plus, Stranger Things was a thing.
True.
Made a good comp.
Fair enough. Makes sense. Josh, did you have any particular? I mean, obviously, Friday the 13th has to be an influence on Camp Sweetwater. That's the most obvious one. But were there other things specifically from the 80s or pre-80s that you're drawing inspiration from? I
mean, for me, no, because I've never seen any of those scary movies because I'm scared of them. But for me, like, I was born born in 1976, so I feel like 1983. Okay, I was 7. Like I feel like that's the earliest. Like I don't really remember anything before that. You know what I mean? Like you don't really remember too much. I remember a tiny bit, maybe about being 5 or 6. But 1983 is just like that's just the beginning of like that's my when I think about when I was. That's just when I was at camp, and that's when I was like, that's just my childhood. That's like the year of childhood for me is 1983. So just kind of that personal thing for me of just that year made sense. By 1984, yeah, I was like, not that I was older, but I was like, upper elementary school or whatever. I was like starting to. I think I just think 1983 was like that. Just says childhood to me, being born in '76. So. But yeah, and I like everything from that era is just kind of funny to me. Like. Yeah, like the high tube socks. Like on the cover, I kept saying, make the socks higher. Pull up those socks. More tube socks. Like more short shorts. Like just short shorts and tube socks. There's like a lot of like 80s tennis, like Bjorn Borg and John McEnroe. Like just stuff I think is funny. Like it's just funny to me. Music of the early 80s is funny to me. Like just culturally, it's all amusing to me because I guess it's just because it's when I was discovering the world and it just seemed so, just my first awareness of the bigger world, and then it all seemed so important. And then, some years later, looking back on it, you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. So it's just to me, it's just that personal perspective of like a real hate, like a real. It just is a sort of to me, just sort of an absurd time in fashion and in music and in everything. It's just kind of funny, but probably just because I was 7 years old at the time. Not for any. I'm sure any other period looks equally silly with that kind of lens, but to me that's just why. So is 1983 when
I was 10. I was 10 in 1983, and like I was super into like Zilpha Keatley Snyder, Mary Downing Hahn. I mean, I was just the Dollhouse Murders, that book knocked my socks off. Like I was like, yeah, that's my jam. And I really for all of the grown-up stuff that we think about, that time period, that was like 1983 was like, when books and magic were the absolute most real, like all of this stuff could possibly happen,
Was that when Friday the 13th came out? Was that a 1983 film?
No, the first one was in 1979, and then there was one in 1982, and
so those are older. Okay.
Yeah, and the thing is that Nightmare on Elm Street is going to come out in 1984, and Nightmare on Elm Street changes everything on the horror scene, and so there's very much you have the scary crap happening in the woods era, and then you get Freddy Krueger, and from Freddy Krueger then you get the Candyman, and you get Jacob's Ladder, and it really changes what horror is in film up until you start to get to the 90s pure slasher aesthetic.
I've never seen any of the films I've never seen a single one of them. I don't even know.
I feel as part of the research for Camp Murderface 3, you need to sit down and watch all of these. It's really the only way you could do it.
I think it would be hilarious to do like a watch through for just one of them. Just one, because I don't want to traumatize Josh forever.
Yeah,
no, you could live stream. You could live stream your reactions. It would be a great promotional event for the book. Make this happen.
Okay, I was gonna say I already spend enough on therapy. I don't need to like that pill. I'm not watching all the horror films in a row. I'll never get out from under that. But maybe if I could, that'd be. Yeah, there'll be a lot of this. The whole live stream will be this. It'll just be me hiding my.
But I want to hear what Rob's theory was on why we said it.
Yeah, that's why I want. That's why I wondered.
My theory was that it would be a personal time for one of you, or if not both of you, to reflect fondly, and also because of Friday the 13th, and it's a camp thriller. That was really the extent of my thoughts.
Okay. So it was a lot of that, but also things.
Yes.
I have deep thoughts all week long. I keep both off the show. This is the free show. You don't get the deep thoughts for free. Well, I did want to ask, because you mentioned, your therapist. You mentioned how we're trying to figure out promotional events because you're launching a book And I always point out that when we do this, when we talk about the elephant in the room, it's May 19th is when we're recording this. So anything historical that's happened after May 19th, we don't know about. The aliens didn't land until May 25th. No idea that happened. And why not? They're crashing in Mage, Brazil this week. Has been the big news I've been following. I'm sick of the coronavirus. My God, tell me about the crash flying saucer in Brazil. But I do want to ask about launching during quarantine, and also how that's impacting your launch, how you're finding ways to promote, and also how that's impacting your writing. And it's up to you who wants to go first.
I'm going to go first.
Fair enough.
Because I want to. We actually had a Zoom, the only Zoom we've ever had in our entire career, to discuss how we were going to do marketing for Camp Murderface, because obviously things are so different. And we decided that, we knew that we were going to be on your show, and thank you for having us. And we had planned to put together like a short run podcast series where we ask other authors to tell us like the scary story from when they were a kid or their camp story, something like that. But like all of the things that we had originally planned way back in the beginning, we can't do them. And we were like, well, maybe we can get into a whole bunch of classrooms, or maybe we can do a whole bunch of online events. And it ended up being a really sad conversation, because ultimately we both kind of realized is like, kids are already on the internet in classroom all day long. And the last thing they want to do is come to another class-like event in their free time. And it's just really tough because, any time that you write a book and sell it is like, well, maybe this will be the big one. And Josh and I have joked about how these books are going to make us bazillionaires, and they're going to ask us to write 47 of them and everything else. And some of it was jokes, but there's, a lot of wishful thinking in that too.
Oh, don't forget your old friend, Middle Grade Ninja, when all that happens.
Right. And so, to realize that the book is going to come out, and knowing that middle grade is driven so much by libraries, which are closed, and schools, which are closed, it does there, for me anyway, there is, a measure of grief that goes with this, because we were so excited about getting to launch this. And we were planning camp overnight in the library events, and maybe we can hook up with this summer camp and all kinds of stuff, or doing a small tour and starting in Pennsylvania and ending, in Bethlehem and ending in Indianapolis and Indiana. And it just all went away. And there was nothing that we could do about it. And we drafted a lot of Murderface 2, right as everything was starting to shut down, because I think it was in February that our editor was like, could you guys have this done by May 1st? And in February, we were all like, sure, no problem. And then the world just stopped, and it was really hard. It was really hard to write that book and to be joyful about it. There were a lot of early chapters that we both rewrote a lot of stuff, because you could tell that we were sad when we were writing them. And it's like, but the characters don't have to be sad. So, I think that we had plans to buy a t-shirt cannon. A t-shirt cannon.
That could still happen.
That is happening.
You could drive by and have kids stand outside and just shoot at them with a cannon.
That's
socially 6 feet apart, socially distant.
Social distance t-shirt cannoning.
Swag delivery.
There's nothing overly personal about a cannon. I would say that would be
But yeah, things have changed a lot, and so now we're trying to do the stuff that we think that people would enjoy doing anyway, listening to your favorite authors talk about ghost stories, or watching or listening to a podcast like yours that people were enjoying anyway, rather than trying to basically shove more what might feel like classroom down a bunch of kids' throats who are already going through so much. but there was, there was that grief that is like, this goofy, happy thing that we came up with in a truly goofy and happy time is now coming out now. And my hope is that, even if they don't want to watch a Zoom about it, that they do want to go to a haunted camp and quit thinking about all of this. So that's my hope.
That's right. Nice paper book comes in handy, because I'd become a snob and was hauling my Kindle around prior to quarantine. But now I'm online interfacing with everybody all the time. And my God, when work's done and it's book time, give me the paper. Give me away from the screen. I'm sorry, Josh. I wanted to give you a chance to chime in as well. What's been your experience with this?
I mean, that I feel like every writer's had a different experience during this time period, because to some, at first thought, it may think, hey, well, that's a good time to have a deadline, is when you're trapped in the house. What better time to be on deadline? But first of all, if your mind is not in the right place, then that's hard. And second of all, if you have a job like mine, you're always on, kind of like, and even when the building's closed, there's like, the work day is like so blurred now, like, you don't know when anything happens. Like, it just, your phone goes at different times and emails and who knows what. So it's very like, it's very, very disorienting, this whole time period, I'm sure, for lots of people, myself included. And I think that, I don't know. I mean, for me, it's like,
Josh, I think we might have lost you for a moment.
Oh, no. Come back, Josh. Uh-oh. Yeah,
no, he's really gone.
Well, I will tell you that there was one point, because he's the director of the Bethlehem Public Library. And my wife works at the Indianapolis Public Library. And so, I've been, kind of comparing and contrasting some of the things that they've been doing. And before Josh's library actually shut down, there was a meeting with a handful of people, the mayor and other people from the city county building. And somebody turned to him and said, so what do you think they're thinking about doing at the library? And Josh is in his head going, I am the one who's thinking the thing. He's ultimately the one who's responsible for all the decisions that are made about the Bethlehem Public Library. So, while certainly things have been kind of tough for me, because I'm worried about my family, and I'm worried about, trying to make sure that everybody gets groceries, and, to make sure that the grownups and, my aunt, my mom, are not going out to the grocery store. Josh literally has hundreds of people's jobs in his hands, and he has a huge responsibility when it comes to, the well-being of his employees and of his patrons, and especially because they do lots and lots of stuff with kids in his libraries. So, I've watched Josh, and I mean, the fact that he managed to continue to write Murderface while also managing, a city's entire public library system during this has been phenomenal. I mean, I don't know how he's done it. I really don't, because he has had so many big things on his mind that, to try and then turn that off and sit down and let's be funny and let's be scary and get things down, we're going to do that. And I'll tell you what, some of the things that I've seen him do is, because he doesn't necessarily have the luxury of, well, if I feel like sitting down and writing, I can sit down and write almost any time. He doesn't have that luxury, but I will see him in the document, and he will be making bullet points of, and sometimes it's just bullet points of dialogue, or it's bullet points of this is going to happen. And all the time that he's working as the director of this library system, he's also working so hard on this middle grade novel at the same time. And, well, now he officially left. I wonder if he's going to come back.
We'll give him a moment, and if not, we'll get him back.
There he is.
Hey, Josh has returned. Oh, hooray.
But anyway, so like I was saying, Josh is a big doofus and he doesn't work hard at all.
Like you're saying.
Sandra was telling us about your substance abuse issues and your previous crimes. It was pretty bad.
Oh, no.
No, but seriously, I was talking about how hard you have worked, because you're responsible for an entire library system and at the same time responsible for putting down words on, a very silly, sometimes scary book, and that I've seen you, putting down like your bullet points of, this is kind of where I think I'm going to go, and like sketching in your chapters and stuff like that. And just how much I admire the amount of thinking that you have had to do. Because, my life did not change super a lot, except there were a lot more people in my house. Your life has changed radically. So it means a lot that you were able to continue to go to the Murderface place with me.
Yeah, and all I was going to say before my phone died, sorry about that, was that I think for me, it has been during this past couple months anyway, what I hope it'll be for readers. Like writing the second book has been this sort of like, with everything else that's going on in my life and in the news and in the world, whatever, it's just like, well, for part of the day, I'm just going to focus down on Camp Murderface and spend some time there and spend some time in a different world. And, and that has been a nice, it's hard to focus sometimes, but like, it's been a nice, like other thing to focus on, so, and it's always fun. Like this project is always fun. Like it does not feel like work very much. I mean, there are days that I don't feel like writing, like to be honest. I'm like, well, it's great for me to have a partner who's like sitting there waiting for the words because it keeps me honest, but it also, for the most part, it's fun. And, yeah, and you see, it is funny to like share it with someone because Saundra sees like the best. Like sometimes I'll just write totally dumb. Not a kitty. Sometimes sometimes I'll just write bullet points, or sometimes I'll just write the most boring sentences just to move the plot along, and like I just have to trust that like that Saundra knows like I'll go back and make it better. But like it's a funny experience sometimes having someone see your first ugly draft all the way through. But there's a matter of trust there now. So
because you're seeing my first ugly draft too, and it's always like I write very dry when I'm very first starting. Like I go through and I'm like, all right, this is all the stuff that happened. And then I have to go back and add like the sensory detail and like, try and make the sentences fun as opposed to, and here's a laundry list of this chapter.
Yeah. But sometimes, right. That's like, sometimes you just think about one of my, it's funny because I haven't read a lot of Stephen King's fiction because it scares me, but I do really like his book on writing. And that is one of my favorite craft books. And he does say that, and sometimes it's just literally and then the guy walks across the room. Like sometimes he just has to get across the room.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that's exact quote, but it's something like that. He's like, it's okay just to write the most boring things just to move it to the next thing, and then you can go and dress that up and make it better and better and better. But sometimes you just have to just move it along.
Yeah. So, sometimes the guy just has to walk across the room.
Yeah. He just has to get there. So, it's I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's been a good experience. It's been really fun. Even the days that it feels like I don't necessarily know if I have it in me or not. Like it ends up being fun. So.
Well, shout out to Stephen King, who definitely needs it. But I'd like to point out that despite all of his early success, despite those prime writing years of the 80s, that guy still got it. The Institute, my God, it's among his best. That was a year ago. I've got If It Bleeds on my audio file. I haven't got to it because I've got another podcast I'm doing this week, and I'm responsibly reading. But by God, as soon as I'm done all the reading that I for sure have to do and want to do, if it bleeds, I can't wait. So there you go, Mr. King, free commercial just for you. Thank God. Another commercial.
Feel free to do the same.
Yeah.
I think there was a new Hunger Games came out today. So Susan Collins, there you go. Yeah. Shout out to you.
Feel free to give us a shout out.
I'm watching our time fly by, and I know we're getting late, and it's probably about time to start thinking about calling this a day while it's still fun. But by God, I try never to make a promise to esteemed audience, and I promised we would talk about Saundra being a phone psychic. So, Saundra, what was your experience being a phone psychic, and also, are you psychic?
I think I'm psychic in the way that people who pay attention to other people are psychic. We spend a lot of our time socialized, like not to notice, because if somebody says, hi, how are you? They don't expect you to actually say how you are. There's a lot of, polite. And, I've always been interested in the fact that, if you're really paying attention, you can sometimes tell when people are lying about now. Yeah, I'm fine. Everything's great. Josh actually mentioned it earlier that sometimes I can just tell by the way he's typing that things are not okay. I can actually do that with my best friend too. It's like, I know that if she has not used an exclamation point, or if she says, hey, instead of hey, yeah, I know that, she's not okay. I know there's something going on. So
you did. Now she's listening to this, and from now on, she'll make sure she always says, "Hey, that's over."
I like that you're a punctuation psychic.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what that means, but I feel like that's what you are.
Punctuation psychic. But I mean, it's paying attention to how people generally are and noticing when things deviate from that. And that's what a lot of psychics, including phone psychics, are doing. They're, when we talk about cold reading, you're not necessarily talking to somebody that but you do know one thing when somebody comes to a psychic, which is either they want to find out if you're psychic or there's something going on and they want somebody to talk to about it. I was a phone psychic for a long time in the 90s, and I would go through the obligatory, I would pull out my tarot cards and but people tell you everything that they need to know, that you need to know to actually be a good phone psychic. And, what's interesting is that there's also this thing called, the bias of confirmation. I can make a bunch of guesses if I make them gently enough. And, if I say, your mother's name is Sharon. Well, your mom's name is not Sharon. But I can say, is there an older woman in your life? And like, if you were just with your mom, wow, yeah, there is. Or, if you were just with your great aunt, that kind of thing. Or if your great aunt died, you're like, no, she died. It's like, oh, I can tell that she's weighing heavily on your mind. It's very much kind of like an improvisational piece where you pay attention to what people say. You repeat back the things that they tell you, because they'll tell you all kinds of stuff. They'll sit there and tell you their whole life story. And then, they will ask their question and I'll say, it's like, well, I think that the relationship that you had maybe with a male figure in your life is what made you reach for love. And they're like, that's so true. I always wanted my dad's love. And it's like, you just told me. But they don't remember that part. They don't remember everything that they tell you. And quite frankly, even the gotcha people, you can sometimes get them back simply by listening to the things that you can tell when somebody's lying to you. If you're paying really close attention, it's like, so is there a woman in your life? Yeah, there's a really important woman in my life. Ha ha, But, as a phone psychic back then, when you couldn't get everything for free on the internet, people would pay, $4.99 and $5.99, for the first minute, and then like $2.99 for each additional minute. And my job was not to be a psychic, but it was to keep people on the phone as long as possible. And the longer I kept them on the phone, the more money that I would make. And 9 times out of 10, if somebody's calling a phone psychic at midnight, they straight up, they either want somebody to talk to, or they want somebody to tell them that they are making the right decision. Like, so am I doing the right thing about my boyfriend? It's like, the boyfriend that cheated on you 4 times with your own mother? Yes, it's totally the right thing to dump him. Excellent decision making. You're in the right place.
But you don't want to tell them like the first 5 minutes, right? That insight comes at 30, 45 minutes.
It's like, I don't have to talk for 90 minutes, but they will talk for 90 minutes. Or it's just a lot of times it's people who are lonely and like they don't care about the psychic reading. They know that as long as they stay on the line, you're going to stay on the line with them. And I ultimately quit that job. I tell people that it's like the saddest job in the world, because I had an older woman call me at one point, and she was one of the ones, she's like, don't even worry about the cards, honey. And she just wanted to talk about her day and what the weather was like, and what, the cat that she would feed on the back porch hadn't been around, and she was worried about the cat, and on and on and on. And I'm just like, cha-ching, because she was like a champion talker. I mean, this was like, A+. I was going to get so much money off of this call. And then we had probably been on the phone for, 90 minutes at that point. And she said, hold on a second. And so she's gone for a moment. And then she comes back and she whispers. And she says, my son just got here. I'm not supposed to be calling these lines. Hold on. I'll call you back from my other phone. And she hung up. And I'm like, oh, my God. Because this was obviously somebody who has been doing this a lot, to their own detriment, to the point where her son knows that she has been spending who knows how much on phone psychics, because I don't pretend that I was the only one that she was calling, because I'm sure she had plenty of stuff to talk about in the afternoon to somebody else. And I could not pick up the phone again after that, because that was the point at which I realized, is like, as many people as there were who just wanted me to say, yes, you're making the right decision, there were those lonely people who just wanted to talk, and I was not helping them by listening, that I was actively hurting them. And so that was the last phone psychic call I ever took. So it was a very weird job. It was, again, one of those jobs that actually paid more than minimum wage, being, a high school, just having a high school diploma. And it was something that I could do at home so that I could take care of my kids. So, I do more psychic work just hanging out with my friends than I ever did on the phone psychic line. So, I think that anybody can be psychic, but I do think that there are some people who do have just a little bit more. And I don't know if it's just that they have managed to like tweak a little part of their brain differently, or if they're still in possession of like, a preternatural sense that we had way back when we were Cro-Magnon and they just happened to hold on to it, or what. But there are people that I have met that have been like, and I know your mother's name is Sharon. And it's like, okay. Nobody's name is Sharon, by the way. So don't try hacking anybody's password here. But that's the phone psychics. I'm a punctuation psychic with my friends. And I was
Sharon
just
forever is actually my password for everything. So.
And the phone psychic job was it was a job that I could do at home and was real easy until it was suddenly very not.
Well, honestly, those folks then would call customer service, which is where I was working early on, and would talk my ear off while I'm just trying to give them information about their financial accounts. So in a way, although not great for them, you were performing a service for me and all the other customer service folks who then weren't having to have the conversation about the cat.
Plus, to be fair, my job was to keep them on the line as possible. Your job was to get them off the line as quickly as possible. So...
And sometimes those folks do call libraries too. So I know some of the same people.
Wait though, while we have you, Rob, have you ever seen a ghost?
Oh, wow. You must be psychic, because that was literally my next question to you was, have you seen ghosts and or flying saucers? I have told 5 lies since the start of this podcast. What were they? No, dude. I have never seen a ghost.
One, that you like any book better than ours. 2, that you
Bet
never
you read
want
our
anybody
book.
else on the show but us. Sorry, go ahead.
Ghost. I have not seen a ghost personally, but I've also not seen a flying saucer, tragically, but I have people close enough to me who've seen both that I remain completely open-minded. But flying saucers more so than ever, because my God, the news buried underneath the daily headlines of the stupid things that the president keeps saying. The Pentagon's releasing videos. My God, we've got the crash going on in Mage, Brazil. All kinds of fun stuff happening. So, okay, your turn. Josh, I feel like it's been a minute since we heard from you. Have you seen a flying saucer and or a ghost?
No, I never have. But
Son.
I've been in situations in my life where I completely understand why someone would believe that they saw a ghost, if that makes sense. Like, I've had experiences where I was like, I think I just saw something like ghostly, right? And then I stopped and realized like what was going on in my head at the time, and I was able to kind of like think it through, like, well, that was probably a natural phenomenon that you imbued with supernatural power because you were feeling something very strong that you can't make sense of in your head. So, like, I've had experience, like, if that makes sense.
Or you talked yourself down from the genuine event that occurred in your life.
Yeah. So maybe I did. In other words, yes. In other words, yes, I've seen ghosts. I just talked myself out of believing it. Yeah. There you go.
And Sandra, same question.
I've seen a handful of things, but the one that I like to share is it was Thanksgiving at my grandmother's house. I was probably 7 or 8, and my brother was 2 years younger than I was. And we were the youngest grandkids out of like 13. So, like, no one wanted to play with us. So it was me and Matt. And it was an older house that had stairs, like these super narrow, super high stairs that went up to what used to be but they had made it over kind of into a small apartment, and that was where like the big bathroom in the house was. There was like a little weird one right off the kitchen, but of course all the grown-ups were working in the kitchen and we weren't allowed in the kitchen. And so Matt and we had originally gone upstairs to go to the bathroom. And so then we were goofing around upstairs in this attic apartment. There was nobody that lived there anymore. So, like, there were boxes and stuff like that. And the way that the house was built, it was one of the old Sears kit houses. And so there was a closet that also functioned as a wall between like the front room and the back bedroom. And there was a door on this side that went straight through the closet into the other room. And then there was the doorway on this side that went straight through into the other room. And my brother and I split off at the same time. And I went through the closet and Matt went through the door. And when we came out on the other side, there was this old guy we had never seen before sitting by the window. And then we screamed and freaked out and ran downstairs. I mean, ran screaming down the stairs, went into the kitchen that we were not allowed to be in. And we told them that there was a man upstairs by the window, and we didn't know who he was and everything else. And so all of the grown-ups got all wound up, and they went upstairs to go investigate it. And there's nobody up there. And we got spanked for lying. But I know that there was something there because both of us came through those doors at the same time. We were like chasing each other. We were not like telling each other ghost stories or anything. We had just been running around because we were the youngest kids at Thanksgiving and there was nothing else to do. We came through those doors at the same time, saw the same thing, both knew that it didn't fit, and consistently told stories to the grown-ups downstairs who plainly did not believe us because we got spanked. But it bothered my grandmother enough that she talked to the neighbors who had lived there before they had moved in to the house. And it turned out that the family before them, the grandfather, stayed up in that attic because that is where he could see the persimmon trees out back when they would bloom and when they would fruit and stuff like that. And he liked to be up there, and he died in that room. So I have seen a thing, and I did not see it by myself.
Sounds 100% to me. There we are. Confirmation. Ghosts exist, people. There is hope.
We've cleared that up for all time now.
Was this in Indiana?
Everybody calm down.
Was this in Indiana?
Yeah, this was in Indiana.
So
yeah,
ghosts exist in Indiana.
Yes, just in Indiana.
Since all the corn breeds them. Wouldn't events become a thing again if you I'm sure you've bumped into Francesca Zappia out and about at an Indiana event. Oh, sit her down. When we did our podcast, she was recording from a haunted house. She's got all the best ghost stories.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, I'm going to have to talk to her. And see, that was another thing that I wanted to do is I wanted, like, you know, because we were going to do like a renewed push of marketing around Halloween. And I wanted to take Josh to a real haunted house. And I don't think I'm going to get to this year.
Good.
Josh looks so disappointed.
See how uncomfortable Josh is now? He's like, that sounds like a good idea.
I know there's reasons why these things are the way they are. And this will be more of a complaint than a question, but I don't understand why, with a book that's set in 1983, that book is not going to be less relevant suddenly next year or the year after. I mean, it's dated from launch. So I don't understand why some of these marketing events can't happen a year from now, 2 years from now, whenever, 5 years from now, whenever quarantine ends.
I mean,
certainly they could. It's just a question of how long the book stays in print. Because unfortunately, if it doesn't initially sell well, since they went ahead and put it out on this date, you know, it might go out of print, and so it might not be around for us to do events. But we're going to hope that that's not the case.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, let's end on a cheerier note. My last question is always some variation of this, and I'm going to ask both of you. Okay. If there was 1 or 2 bits of advice you could go back and give yourself at the start of your writing career that would have made things significantly easier for you and might make things easier for all those authors and aspiring authors listening now, Josh, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Man, that is a good question. And I wish that I could tell myself, like, it's like kind of cliche, I guess, but just to enjoy it a little bit. I'm not super good at that. Like, when good things happen in the beginning, my first thought is like, oh, I hope I don't screw this up, you know, instead of thinking like, you should stop and enjoy this right now while it is happening, because I'm the kind of person who can take good news and turn it into bad news, like in my own head, you know? And it's just such a, like Saundra mentioned earlier, it's like playing the lottery. It's such like a crazy business that you don't know what's going to happen. And when something good happens, like, it's okay just to celebrate it and just to enjoy it and just to not worry about what it means or worry about what it means for the next phase. I had a lot of really good stuff happen with my first book, and I didn't realize how lucky I was. And I didn't enjoy it as much as I could have because I was always worried about what's next. So that's advice for life in general, I guess, you know, but definitely in the writing world, you can't predict what's coming. So, you know, give yourself the freedom to enjoy it while it's happening. There's nothing wrong with that.
And Sandra, same question.
For people who aren't agented yet, who are still like working their way into it, stop worrying about the market. Just write the book that you really, really mean, because nobody has ever responded to, wow, this was exactly formulaic in the way that I wanted it to be. People enjoy bad books because they respond to the sincerity in it. I mean, everybody likes to bag on Twilight, and maybe Stephenie Meyer is not, William Shakespeare, but she meant the heck out of those books, and people responded to that. And she basically made our careers possible.
And now we've listed all the unfortunate authors.
Yeah, she's got a new book coming out too.
You're saying, I'm sorry.
But for people who are now have sold a book and they're working through the business part of it, it's really important to remember the difference between the business and the not business, because this is your art time is when you write that book. After that, once you say, I'm going to sell this book, now you're in business, and you need to think like a business person, and you need to remember that you are in the business of protecting yourself as a writer, and the company is in the interest of protecting themselves as a company. So it's important really to have somebody who can advocate for you effectively. And it's important for you to realize that being a nice person and, being a person that your editor enjoys, they're not going to buy your next book because you're a nice person who turns things in on time. They're going to buy your next book because they can sell it. And so, you have to treat the business part of this business like business, even if it is playing the lottery for a living. You still have to think, there will be plenty of people who will try and talk you out of things, who will try to convince you that it's okay to, it's fine to take a lesser advance if you really like a different editor. Screw that. You can learn to like an editor. You cannot spend money they did not give you. And if somebody offered you that much money, that's how much money your book was worth. And also, your copy editor is not out to get you. That's the less serious one. But seriously, just remember that once, that even though we talk about this job in romantic terms, and it is a beautiful and romantic and magical business that's full of art, but it is a business that's full of art. And you have to advocate for yourself, and you have to remember that you're in business for you. You're not in business for a publishing company.
I think that's an excellent note to end on. We've done it. What an incredible podcast we've had. Remind esteemed audience where they can find you online and stalk you on Twitter and all that good stuff. Josh.
I am Josh Berk Books. That's my website name, and that's my Twitter profile. We made something pretty cool on campmurderface.com, which is a little like old school, like Nintendo style video game out of the characters in the book. It's a real mini game. It takes like a minute to play it, but you can play as either Tez or Corinne and jump your way through the haunted camp and get to the end. And that is like just one of the just weird ideas that we had. And it's just so funny how it came together. I just know some people who work in that world, and they designed and programmed this whole game for us. So campmurderface.com is super fun little mini game. Josh Berk Books is a way if you want to say hi online. Be happy to say hi back.
Also on campmurderface.com is a video we made the first time we actually met each other in person. And we were like, okay, well, we've had tacos, and so now we're in a city that neither of us lives in. Let's run through this hotel and make a random video about our book. And so we did. It's completely unscripted. We made it on our phones. It's very silly. I am currently on a Twitter hiatus because sometimes I just have to walk away from the news so that I don't have a stroke. But normally you can find me on Twitter at Saundra Mitchell. If you want to check out my Instagram, it's Saundra Mitchell, it's S Mitchell Books. However, my Instagram is really only interesting if you like pictures of food that I have cooked. I like to bake, I like to cook, and I like to take pictures of the food that I cooked. So you can also find me on my website, which is saundramitchell.com. And I think that's everywhere. I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, but I lost the password years ago. And they continue to send me updates, but they won't let me reset the password. So don't feel bad if you add me on LinkedIn and I don't reply. I haven't been able to reply to anybody for 6 years on LinkedIn, because that's where all the middle grade readers are, is on LinkedIn. Very popular with the 6th grade set.
I get people send me freelance stuff through LinkedIn. Doesn't hurt.
Can I give one more?
Yeah.
Can I give one more piece of advice?
I'm sorry about the time. Have a good night.
I really wanted to just sap it up at the end and say, like, to other authors just getting started, is like, the other authors out there, they're not your competition. Like, they're your colleagues, and sometimes they become like your best friends. So, you never know where that friendship might go and what beautiful collaborations might come out of it. So I'm really thankful to people like Saundra, who were like, so kind to me in the very, very beginning days. And, it's allowed us to sort of have a collegial, because it's a lonely business, and so we become each other's coworkers. And then, when we became friends in 2010, it wasn't with the thought that, hey, maybe our careers will benefit from knowing one another and we'll get to publish a book together. It's nothing like that. It's just we're all in this together. So, good things happen when we keep that in mind. Yeah, sapped it up. Yeah.
The more you know.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much to both of you for making the time. Thank you as always to esteemed audience. Don't forget, esteemed audience, keep tabs on the show at middlegradeninja.com. Find out who's coming on. Get your entire back catalog. Get all those written interviews I mentioned. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. It will make you a better human. And God willing, I'm alive. I will see you next week.